Hello, good evening, and welcome back. So, Boris is standing steadfast. He's the bulwark of the Conservative Party. From the BBC, General Election 2019, Boris Johnson rejects pact with Nigel Farage. And before we go on, if you like what I do please like, share around, subscribe, and all the good stuff. We're still trying to be noticed favourably by the YouTube algorithm as much as I'm sure I'm throttled and I'm able to degrade myself with my own content. But nonetheless, do what you can. It's much appreciated. So, let's read on. Boris Johnson has rejected the suggestion from Nigel Farage and Donald Trump that he should work with the Brexit Party during the election. And I would say this really depends what your goal is, because of course if you say, well, I'm going to be very pragmatic about it. I would like, I have my own morals and principles that I would like to abide by, and therefore it doesn't have to be me that does it. It just has to get done. I don't care who does it, as long as it's done, which is the average voter, I suppose. Somebody who is not outspoken and a politician themselves, but they vote for what they believe in instead. Of course, it's very difficult to find somebody who reflects your morals and principles, absolutely, but nonetheless, for things that you find important, you can probably find a close enough fit, hopefully. So with this in mind, obviously the topic of the day is Brexit. So here we have basically a third referendum. Seeing as the second was the 2017 election, where even Labour was saying, yes, we're pro-Brexit, and then afterwards they've done everything they can in order to halt Brexit. But nonetheless, let's not go into what Corbyn's stance is on the European Union yet again. So the Tories are being received reasonably popular in the polls, comparing to their rivals at the mid-30s, I believe, about 34%. Funnily enough, of course, 33% is what Hitler did to rise to power. But maybe that's a bad example. So, yes, if Boris Johnson joined with Farage, as Trump suggested as well, basically if they put their egos to one side and say, well, we should team up for the good of the country, we should do what public servants should do, what they were made to do, and serve the people, then they would easily run the country without much of a problem. And I do understand the concern, well, hey, why would you vote for the Brexit Party when it's Brexit initially, but then you've still got 5 years? Well, for a starter, I would say that Brexit is the most pressing matter, and it's difficult to think that our democracy still works. And maybe I'm naive and thinking, third time lucky, but nonetheless, surely if people vote for it a third time, then it's at that point, it's either, well, it is do or die. It is get it done or literally die. There have been threats and attacks to politicians already, and they will only increase. I would say I do not condone violence to anybody, but that's not true. I do not condone unprovoked violence to anybody. And as I've said before, as the government has the monopoly on force, and they have to respect the will of the people in order to hold their side of the agreement, the moment that they say, yeah, well, we hear what you say, but we're not going to do it, but we're still going to make our own rules and hurt you, imprison you, restrain you for what we think, then, as far as I'm concerned, the people have the right to say, well, no, I didn't agree to what you're doing in hurting me, and therefore I'm going to hurt you. That is exactly the same. You can't respect the rule of law like that if it's not something that was agreed upon. And that's not including losers' consent, of course, because this is something that, I mean, with regards to people voting for it as a majority, it not getting done, and then the opposite happening, which then has the knock-on ramifications of imprisonment or worse. But the Brexit Party, yes, they have many different stances, and when you're thinking Claire Fox and Widdicombe, how much can they really agree upon? Good point, not much. So they would even out as inert. They would be a nothing party, shall we say. Okay. In that case, you have the Tories, where you know their stances. You have Labour and Lib Dems, where you know their stances. Probably as much as you can for any political party. And then the Brexit Party, which evens out as not having a stance other than Brexit. Okay. So, the plan with the pact is the Brexit Party does not remove any votes from the Conservatives. Instead, it removes votes from the opposition of Labour and the Liberal Democrats, and maybe the SNP as well, but I doubt any party can go into their nationalistic policies despite saying that nationalism is bad. But hey, cognitive dissonance is strong with the left, isn't it? It's the only way they can actually get on with life. Because we all know facts don't care about your feelings, and of course their feelings don't care about facts. So, in that case, the Brexit Party would destroy the support for Labour and the Lib Dems in those strongholds, particularly the Labour strongholds. It would get rid of them, and it would knock the vote down, hopefully, that the Brexit Party could then win out, as Lib Dems would also be splitting the Labour vote, and you wouldn't have enough Conservatives, so the Brexit Party would scoop up all of them, and some of the Labour vote as well. Okay, in that case, you'd have a parliament with maybe still a minority with the Conservatives not gaining enough seats for a majority government. Okay, they would form a coalition with maybe the DUP in that case, in which case they'd still be fine. But if they only get 10 votes like last time, that may not be enough, in which case also with the Brexit Party. And I would say yes, go with both, not just one. But they agree to form a coalition with the Brexit Party. Okay, so then anything they wish to pass is going to be shot down by Labour and Lib Dems, SNP, who don't really amount for much. Maybe the SNP will be the main runner, probably about 56 seats again. The Brexit Party probably vote for it, vote against in equal numbers, and then abstain. So they don't really matter. So what they would do is nothing, which means they are taking away from voting down the Tories' ideas. That's the point. They are replacing the enemy with someone who is inert, and therefore they are better than the enemy, even if they're not as good as the ideal, should we say. In which case I would say it still makes sense. However, of course, as I said in my last video, Farage hasn't really got anything to lose. But that's my theory, so let's read on what the well-respected BBC says. So, the Tory leader told the BBC he was always grateful for advice, but he would not enter into election pacts. His comments come after the US president said Farage and Johnson would be an unstoppable force. Danishly sources say there are no circumstances in which the Tories would work with the Brexit Party. Maybe they still have to say that. People will be separate and then decide to come together for the 12th of December. We shall see. Labour Shadow Health Secretary Jonathan Ashworth said the public can't even trust the Tories on the NHS, saying they would increase privatisation even further and do a deal with Donald Trump. Well, that's good, because that's where we get most of our medical innovation, as well as other innovation, but medical innovation, which is what saves lives. They say you can have 2 out of 3 of cost, competence, and speed. The UK, we're cheap, and we're proficient. We're good at what we do. But we take so long that somebody who has a minor illness, it might then be fatal before they can be cured. In America, of course, they're competent and they're quick, but they're not cheap, because that's where the medical innovation is. So, let's read on. So, they mentioned that the 12th of December Parliament, and obviously Trump has his own things to say, but what does Farage have to say about it? As Johnson is still saying his Brexit deal is so good, simply the best, people love it, channeling his inner Trump. And of course it isn't, so I'm all for the Brexit Party. If they can knock some sense into the Tories, and Johnson in particular, to just say, hey, world trade, yeah, cool, WTO terms, let's leave, then we can still make some agreements with countries individually. If the EU needs something collectively, then the individual countries will have more of a desire to leave, especially seeing as London is the finance capital of the world, but we can trade with the rest of the world without worrying about the EU, and that will increase its demise, and then we can treat everybody as individuals, or as countries as individuals, instead of collectively in the European Union. And I'm all for that, in principle as well as pragmatically. So, let's skip her analysis, because nobody cares. So, they clean up with saying you can't trust them on the NHS, which goes back to the thought by the academic agent, that is to say, well, hey, the left and the right dichotomy is just the left says something, oh, it's radical, and then 20 years later, it's what the Conservatives are conserving. Same with the NHS. So, well, hang on, a National Health Service, as in, it's socialism, surely it's social healthcare. but now it's supposed to be defended by the Tories, is it? Well no. And then you might go down to individual polls, and that is dangerous water to try and analyse. So like, okay, cool, so the people on this, that's what we should do, isn't it? So, well, maybe. But then the people always have the right ideas. So okay, no, they don't. I think that's quite obvious to say that the people don't always know what's best. But who does? And how do you know it before it happens? Does the government have the best ideas? Well, obviously not. Okay, the people don't always have the best ideas. The government doesn't always have the best ideas. What about the academics, the elites, the people who study this? Still no. So who has the best ideas? You don't know until it's too late. So how do you know? Your best bet is, of course, free speech, air it out, get people to understand. But then, of course, you fall into heuristics and psychological tricks in that it isn't the best argument, it's just how the person conveys themselves in the most amicable manner. It's like being most confident makes people think that you're correct, even though it's just because you're confident. And people think, why would they be confident if they're not correct? So, at that point, it's like, well, okay, what is most morally acceptable? So, okay, in that case, what you've got to say, free speech, cool, let people say what they want in order to try and explain things. And then when it comes to the vote, what should anything be protected? And what makes you think that what you want to protect is more important than what other people want to protect? How do you know that what's happened before in a different culture is the same as yours? Or even in the same country as you, but hundreds of years ago, the result of that is still applicable today? How do you know? And maybe I'm too... it's not uncaring, but I'm too easygoing to then try and put my own morality into it. But it's basically impossible for me to say, well, hey, this is definitely universal morality in terms of this is what should be done and this is a standard, this is something that should never be infringed upon. The best bet you got is separate entities who run their own way. So again, it's just down to the individual. At least at that point, you'd get more people happy with what's happening. Even if other people disagree with the results, you might get the people who voted for it still happy with the results. In which case, fair enough, let them be happy even if you think they're wrong. You could liken it to food preferences, if you will. Let them eat a burger even if you like pizza. They're happy with that, go for it. But in that case, you gotta shrink down the size, but then as things stand, are you forcing people to leave groups and connections which they want to be a part of? But in that case, could you just say, well, if you like that group so much, why don't you go over to them instead? We want to do our own thing. You don't have to come with us, but let's put it another way. I want to do my own thing, and you don't have to, and you don't get to force me to be with somebody else. That you can... The two parties might not want to be with each other, in which case they don't go together. But you can't force them together if one side doesn't want to be there. It's like marriage, I suppose. We got rid of arranged marriages a while ago, and the same should be for Brexit and the like. And I'm all for decentralisation of government, and I think that's the most moral way you can do it. So you basically have a majority by having individuals decide for themselves, and then if you wish to enact change, you don't push it upon people who don't want it, but you give the option to everybody. But now, of course, we're getting into capitalism and meritocracy by giving people the choice and not forcing them into something. So as far as I can see, the morality stems from being an individual. You get to do what you want. If people don't like it, they won't associate with you, and if they do, then they will. If you're born into a group you don't want to be a part of, you don't have to stay there. You can leave, be your own person, but you don't get to drag other people with you. And if they want to stay with that group, then they can, or they can go to that group. That's it for me. Let me know if you understand my tone at the end. Got a bit carried away with my little revelation there. So thank you very much for watching. Like, share, comment, subscribe, all the good stuff, and I will see you next time. Have a wonderful weekend, and good night.